Hey, this is Rob from Producer Tech, and in this movie I'm going to run you through some of the new additions to the latest version of Plugin Boutique's quality stereo enhancing tool, StereoSavage. Namely the phase correlation meter and updated goniometer, and also new split mode for ultra-transparent widening and improved visual feedback. First up then, if you haven't seen StereoSavage before, then this is a great plugin for getting full control over the stereo content of your tracks. Whether it's adding more width to a vocal or lead, making your whole mix sound huge, adding movement to a part, or finding out and fixing any potential stereo mixing issues. Adding the plugin to a track, you'll see instantly how much width your signal has via the redesigned goniometer, which is definitely the best I've seen, and is a much improved style to the scribbled mess that you normally see on these meters. Plus there's now a brand new phase correlation meter underneath, which we'll come onto shortly. Just to the left of this are the utility style controls, so your level and stereo adjustment, that being panning, width, which blends between the mid and sides, and rotation, which is a pretty cool parameter that pans the central signal, or mid, without moving the sides. So if you have a sound with lots of reverb like this one, and you pan it hard left or right, then the entire signal shifts, so you're left with nothing in the other channel. Whereas with rotation, just the direct sound shifts and the reverb stays where it is, so it's a way more natural effect. Then, the main stereo generators, so the parameters that create additional stereo information rather than just control it, are in the effect section, where there are now 4 modes. The first 2 are the most common stereo wideners, being a Vox mode for applying detuning to the left and right channels, and the other adding a delay. Then expansion applies wide early reflections to the sound, which is a more aggressive effect, but can be brought under control with the mix dial. Then the last and latest one is split, which actually came about in response to customer requests for something subtler, which can be used more effectively on acoustic sounds, which might not want such an obvious and transformative stereo enhancement. Before we listen to these modes though, let me show you exactly what the new meters tell you, using this synth sound as an example first. It's just analog playing a single square wave, with a bit of filtering, so I know it's a completely mono signal, and you can see the goniometer confirming that, with it only showing up in the center here. So I can pan the signal left and right, and you can see it moving. And if I add some reverb to the sound before StereoSavage, so we get some stereo information added by that, you can then see how those reflections look. And also see the difference once again between panning, which shifts everything left and right, and rotation, which just shifts our original mono signal. And then there's width, which then blends between the mid and sides. So in the default position of 1, it's regular stereo with mid and sides, and reducing it blends out the sides until it's mono again. And the other way blends out the mid until we're just left with the stereo information, so in this case, reverb. And remember that without the reverb, adjusting the width won't do a great deal, as the signal is mono. So going to mono doesn't change it at all, and listening to the sides just fades out the mid, so we hear nothing. Let's add some width with StereoSavage though now, so we'll try Vox mode, which sounds nice on a synth patch like this. It's a pleasing change in character and a bigger sound overall, although going too far will lead to an obviously detuned result. Then you've got delay, which is similar on this type of sound. But again, going too long results in a kind of panning, so there's more obvious movement. And this is clearer on a briefer sound, which you can hear if I tighten the filter envelope. You can see the signal is rarely dominant in the center now. So these are both pretty extreme effects, especially on the most extreme settings. And similarly, expand is one that has a dramatic effect, but can be tamed with the controls to produce some great results. But one thing that all of these modes do a reasonable amount is change the phase correlation, that being the difference in phase between the left and right channels. as you can clearly see on the phase correlation meter below. Just turning off the effects section for a minute so we go back to our mono signal. Now you can see left and right channels are identical once more, and as such are completely in phase, shown by the unmoving positive value on the correlation meter. Now what I could do is introduce some out of phase components, using the input routing section in the corner, to invert the phase of one of the channels. So now the channels are completely out of phase, so the opposite end of the scale now, showing a fixed negative value. And now if I adjust the width dial, we get a very different result, where increasing it makes it louder, as subtracting the inverse signal means they add together. However, going to mono, which sums them, now makes them cancel out. So adding together out of phase components leads to silence. Why is this useful to know? Well, sometimes you might find yourself processing a sound like this vocal here. And you may add some detuning, and then try widening it even more. And maybe get a bit carried away and go all the way out. And if you listen to this in your stereo mix, you might think it's fine. But then you can hear if we make our master channel mono, by either reducing the width control on StereoSavage on that track, or using the mono sum switch, then the vocal completely disappears. Or in less extreme cases, at the very least, gets a lot quieter. So it's something to avoid. And you can hear on the synth sound when we're adding a lot of width, and so getting a lot of difference in phase, the mono signal can sound very different, as lots of frequencies are cancelling out, creating a sort of multi-band notch filter effect. So keeping an eye on the phase correlation meter and checking the mono signal is certainly a good thing to do, particularly when applying these modes heavily like this. So finally, I've got a ride symbol here. With no widening yet, we can see it's a little on the right. And so there's a bit of phase difference going on. Now with the first two modes on this kind of sound, we get a lot of extra width, but at the expense of a big loss in position. And a lot of phase difference going on. And as such, neither mode works very well on this in mono. With split mode though now, which essentially uses comb filtering to split different bands of EQ between the left and right, we get a much more natural sound, with not so much phase discrepancy, which maintains the center dominance too. So sounds good in mono, and can now be positioned nicely with the rotation dial too. So some great new features in the latest version of StereoSavage, which you can hopefully see is an excellent addition to your collection of mixing effects. See you next time.